And we're coming right off the heels of the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. So I want to acknowledge that right off the top of the show. We've got a couple of stories that deal with it. One thing that I did just kind of wanted to get off my chest, besides just, rest in peace and rest in power to George Floyd, but some of the rhetoric bouncing around. So you may have seen like prominent politicians and pundits thanking Mr. Floyd for his sacrifice. And I just want to, anybody out there who's thought about maybe using this language, and, granted, however you might want to talk about this, if you're watching the stream, you can tell I'm very vanilla complected, but I would be very careful about using that language because, I think it's really important to understand, George Floyd and the rebellions and uprisings that happened after his murder. This guy, he wasn't, he wasn't a martyr. He wasn't like on some quest to redeem this country, or to try to defund police. This is a guy, he was just living his life. He went to a convenience store one day and then he got murdered by the police state. He was just a regular guy like you or me, who's wrong place, wrong time, with a murderous police state, and a particularly murderous officer interacting with him later. So I think we all really need to acknowledge that, when, especially the way we tend to kind of lionize or canonize figures like that. I think we all need to just kind of just hold on to the fact, this is a normal guy he was a family man, and he was not expecting to have to sacrifice himself for a movement. And I mean, that's part of the reason I think, it again blew up as much as it did, as well as the subsequent murders that have happened since. In our second hour, I'm actually going to be featuring an episode of Intercepted where they go over the longer history of the relationship between police murder and urban rebellions. So please stick around for that in the second hour. But again, George Floyd, rest in power, and give respect to the fact that this is a guy who he wasn't looking to start recharge a movement or get things on the table. He just wanted to go home. So anyway, I wanted to kind of segue from there into, again, tying this into a local story about how folks in Kalamazoo were engaging with this story, this anniversary. So this is a news story I'm just going to read from the MLive article. For those of you who weren't there, just want to talk a little bit about how Kalamazoo remembered George Floyd. Hundreds gather for 9 minutes and 29 seconds of silence in Kalamazoo to remember George Floyd. This is written by Mary Wiedmeyer. It's from the Kalamazoo Gazette. For 9 minutes and 29 seconds, Bronson Park was nearly silent, with only the sound of cars driving by to disrupt it. About 250 people gathered in downtown Kalamazoo on Tuesday, May 25th, on the one-year anniversary of George Floyd's death. They held 181 yellow crosses to remember the 181 Black people killed by police since Floyd's death. I just do want to take a pause. I think sometimes we're kind of desensitized to this in the United States, but police murder is something that is unique and particularly brutal in this country. Other countries do not have police murder rates anywhere that high. A good example, and I'm just kind of popping this off the top of my head, forgive me if this isn't an exact number, but I believe just Vietnam. So just comparing it to a communist country that is supposed to be authoritarian and all that, they have had 20 police murders in the last 3 decades. And if that's not the exact number, it is somewhere close to that ballpark. And again, United States of America, 181, uh, just black people. Again, you might hear that right wing chestnut from people. It's like, well, cops actually kill more white people. It's like, okay, well then get your white butt out in the streets, please. And in any case, I really just to break that reality down. Police violence is a very like uniquely intense problem in the United States. Anyway, Floyd was killed after now former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin knelt on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds on May 25th, 2020. A jury found Chauvin guilty last month of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. People in Kalamazoo stood silent, and one woman laid on the ground for those 9 minutes and 29 seconds. During that time, co-organizer Quentin Bryant said he thought about what Floyd went through and what his family experienced. I think it was very impactful, Bryant said of the event. The 181 crosses were an important part of this event to remember those 181 lives that were lost while remembering George Floyd at the same time. Activist T.C. Custard said, I think just one person showing up is enough because it's the start of something. Hopefully, it's the start of hope. Tesha Banks attended with her son, Braxton Wallace, 9 years old. She wanted to show him the importance of the memorial and the importance of stopping racism. We're just here to honor George Floyd, Braxton said. To me, it's sad how many have lost their lives. The memorial was organized with local activists, the city of Kalamazoo, the Metropolitan Kalamazoo NAACP, and other groups. First United Baptist pastor Lindsay E. Bell led a prayer before the 9 minutes of silence. Thank you for the organizers of this event and that we will not gather in vain but accomplish great things today and tomorrow, Bell said. State Senator Sean McCann, State Representative Julie Rogers, and Mayor David Anderson were among the officials who attended the event. The memorial was not enough, activist Eric Burton said. He said there was no accountability and it prevented the possibility of an event that could have had a bigger impact on the community. This is almost a slap in the face with how mellow it was, Burton said. This is definitely not enough. It could be a start, but by the standards of Kalamazoo has set for itself, I don't have much luck that will be a start. Like, interesting note to some kind of critique or criticism. I guess I will say for that, there are certainly moments where movements escalate and should. I do think, one, it's important to, events like that are more about mourning. And, there certainly will be moments in our future where we will need to hold the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety accountable. Keep in mind, City of Kalamazoo has not done any sort of real resource reallocation. As a matter of fact, I think the city budget calls for giving the police more money next year. And this is also something you're seeing across the country where these, after the big upswell of rebellion last year, cities are now when they feel people aren't paying attention or are, kind of sleeping on the issue, they're going to try to rescind a lot of their promises. Minneapolis is kind of walking back. It's pledged to dismantle their police department. LA is another good example. They made headlines last year for reallocating a lot of their budget to social programs, but now it looks like they're going to be pumping just as much, if not more money into the LAPD. As I guess the Angela Davis book goes, freedom is in fact a constant struggle, and it's something that we just have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And again, this last summer, this whole last year, even more so than the uprisings in Ferguson in 2014, I think it was a real turning of the page. Even so much as we've seen kind of the way that capitalism gobbles up and defangs movements the LGBTQ community. That's a whole other issue. The corporation of pride, we'll probably talk more about that in June. The fact that you see a lot of major corporations slapping Black Lives Matter and doing like these kind of surface level things, but you cannot capitalize on or appropriate a demand like defund the police or abolish the police. That is a lot more impervious to that kind of consolidation by capital. You can't. Nike doesn't really want to slap that on a shoe or an ad campaign. Um, and it is those concrete, tangible demands that, like, we're talking about actual social transformation and looking at how we can fundamentally alter how we do community safety. That is the right path. We are on the right path, but there's lots and lots of road left to go down, and it's not going to be an easy one. All right, so with that, I think I'm going to continue on. We're talking about BLM. There's a story that I just stumbled upon that I thought was really important, and it relates to some stuff that we're talking about deeply last year, which is the way that Black Lives Matter gets slammed and what's the word I'm looking for? Slandered in right-wing circles with lots and lots of disinformation. Before I dive into the article, I want to kind of just set up the context here too. So, when I was talking with some folks last year, I still have some more conservative friends, or at least like they are more tied into the kind of enclosed information bubble of the right wing. And they have had a whole different kind of perspective on these marches. I was getting peppered with some questions about it's like I just saw this video of BLM beating up white people. This was a big trope, finding videos, whatever, usually out of context, of Black people beating up white people and saying either that they're BLM protesters or they represent BLM, or they are, this is like the modus operandi of BLM, is that they go out beating up white people. Now, any white person who's actually been to a BLM protest, your own personal lived experience, you can debunk that pretty quickly. And it was pretty interesting, like even just debating with this person, it's like, I go to these things, I work in solidarity with them. That is not what happens. Even so the famous white couple that got their guns out on neighborhood when they were marching to the mayor's house, Minneapolis, in that very nice neighborhood, he put an ad talking about a mob coming to harm and pillage and kill his family, which obviously was not the intent or even the goal or mission of that march. It wasn't even didn't even engage in the property destruction that is so often tied into like violent behavior. But the right wing, they have a vested interest in scaremongering and, again, riling up their base to make the other look like the existential threat. I think there were two very critical propaganda stories going on last year that we need to keep in mind that got people to such a frost that many people on like the right-wing bubble last year thought we were going to have a civil war, and then they subsequently just did a 180 and started talking about Dr. Seuss books, but that's a critique for another time. But you had this narrative of BLM / Antifa are going to come into your community and burn down your Dairy Queen. We also had similar stories of people like the Boogaloo Boys coming into our communities, in liberal communities, to or left-wing communities, to like stir up trouble and create destruction. One of those actually was a little bit more true than the others. We had the Chicken Boys come to visit last year, but it does show how basically this kind of setting up this us versus them dichotomy, which is particularly valuable for the political right in this country, because again, if they ran on policy, it would be anathema to the vast majority of people. So they have to make raise the stakes of the culture war issue so high to make people feel like it is a present and lethal and existential danger to them. And this is a lot of what this article talks about. And I don't usually share stuff from NPR, but this makes some really critical and important points. And I'm going to go ahead and read from it. Black Lives Matter fights disinformation to keep the movement strong. This is published May 25th, and it was written by Cheryl Corley. So, goes on to say, on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd died under the knee of Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, and protests erupted worldwide. Support for BLM, the movement that actually began as a hashtag in 2013, surged. To this day, posts on social media continue to call for racial justice and an end to police brutality. But also online are posts riddled with disinformation, including those specifically targeting BLM. Activists charge that those disparaging posts are part of an overall effort to undermine the movement and its message. One post, for example, falsely claims the government has identified it as a terrorist group. Although, side note, the FBI did identify black identity extremists, which, if you go into a longer history of things like COINTELPRO, the government had a vested interest in equating kind of left-wing black nationalist movements with terrorism going on. Another that circulated widely claimed that BLM activists had badly beaten a group of elderly white people. And actually, I think I remember a right-wing former friend or whatever sending me a video like this and asking me like, why isn't BLM just denounced this? And it's like, you know, which I'm going to just sidetrack here. In the heat of the moment, you know, it is really critical to get ahead of disinformation. I was a little worried that not enough was being done in the heat of last summer to try to bring about a counter narrative to this right-wing disinformation. Of course, that has to do a lot with the way that our media ecosystems have been segregated. You know, not to be too cheeky about it, but you know, if you are just getting a constant flux of information of like Fox News and these kind of fringe right-wing websites, you're going to have a completely different picture of what's going on if your media diet is left-wing or liberal sources. So if you're a BLM activist, you're probably not even hearing about any of these accusations the right wing is making, because the stuff that is on your social media is a lot more positive about the movement or critical of you know, the government and the police state. Anyway, that one video, the all of you people getting beat up, that post was debunked by fact checkers who found the photos were of South Africans and had been online for years. It was removed, however. Jordan Geiger, an organizer with Black Lives Matter in South Bend, says there's still plenty of disinformation online designed to create confusion and distrust. Like reports circulating that BLM is going to vandalize businesses in downtown areas, that we are targeting specific, you know, white communities, those kinds of things, it makes our supporters say, okay, I don't want to get involved in that, right? So when those kinds of lies and when the disinformation just goes unchecked, you know, folks will believe it if we don't get ahead of it or respond to it appropriately. Geiger says that's why BLM launched an effort to stop disinformation and urges people to submit details about suspicious posts or stories to the Black Lives Matter website. I'm going to skip down a little bit. You know, so Ashley Bryant, one of the co-leaders of Win Black / Palante, which is a nonpartisan group created to monitor disinformation aimed at people of color, they go on to say, you know, they found conspiracy theories about BLM all over the internet. That went from George Floyd not being dead to, you know, George Soros funding protests and full-out attacks on BLM with their foreign actors. There's also fake accounts pretending to be Antifa, all to actually just build this violent narrative around BLM. Dean Freeland, a journalism professor at the University of North Carolina who studies digital politics, points to specific instances of disinformation about BLM protests engaging in violence. There was a false story about Black Lives Matter allied protesters setting fires in Oregon, and you know, we reported on that last year. It also claims that Black Lives Matter is white-led, and there have been some Spanish language disinformation too. That's also very important, trying to create a wedge between Black and brown communities. Freeland says Twitter has been vigilant about rooting out state-sponsored disinformation from foreign actors, which again, on a little side note, we've talked about this at the show ad nauseum. The influence of foreign actors, it's really way uh, it's usually overemphasized compared to its real impact. Like there is rampant violent disinformation on social media networks, but most of that is homegrown. The vast majority of it is. I mean, yes, you could probably point to some memes that come from, Russia or other states, but it is really a drop in the bucket compared to the disinformation and kind of the violent stochastic terrorism coming out of domestic right-wing meme factories. Anyway, information proven to be false can be removed for violating social media standards. That's not the case when it comes to posts online that are technically considered an opinion, and that's harder to combat. Examples there include things like the notion that BLM is anti-white, which of course is an opinion that is a hate group, Freeland says. That it's somehow anti-family, that is morally equivalent to far-right groups, and then there are some things that kind of blur the line between fact and opinion. Critics of Black Lives Matter, like Mike Gonzalez, Heritage Foundation. Uh, anyway, I'm going to skip that. He goes on, he says that BLM is spreading misinformation and is, again, probably writing some really stupid book about Marxism he didn't know anything about. Anyway, and it goes on to talk about right-wing pundits such as Rudy Giuliani, Candace Owens, and Carol Swain amplify often baseless anti-BLM messages to a wider audience. On a Fox News talk show last July, Giuliani said, BLM wants to come and take your house away from you. They want to take your property away from you. So exactly what I was talking about, that kind of like fear-mongering on social media, but it's taken to, the nth degree, sharing it on a national television network. On a YouTube show the following day, Swain said, they, BLM, are using black people to advance a Marxist agenda. So just a quick side note. So I'm a Marxist. And what is the Marxist agenda? To dismantle capitalism. So, there are some people in the BLM movement who are Marxists, some who are not, some who don't really have enough information about it. But yeah, race and class are inextricably intertwined here in the United States of America. And, it's funny because the right wing tries to scaremonger people about like, oh, some of these BLM people are Marxists. And it's like, oh, you know what that really means? That means they study class analysis. Oh my God. There are organizers studying class analysis. How freaking scary. I think that's so God. Anyway, I mean, that kind of goes into the whole, like, ask a conservative. They have no idea what Marxism actually is, but I'm not going to go into all that. Just going on, during her Twitter video post, Candace Owens described BLM protest as far left crazy Antifa thugs who know exactly what they're doing. Worth noting, I don't like the whole conversation around like what whether protests are valid if they are quote unquote violent, but it is worth pointing out again something like 97% of last year's protests did not engage in any property destruction anyway, usually while being brutalized by the cops. So anyway, Patrice Concours, one of the three co-founders of BLM, responds to some of that on her YouTube channel. I need to set the record straight. Am I a Marxist, she asks. Concours explains that she does believe in Marxism, but laughs at online comments that says she's pushing a communist agenda. I'm working on making sure that people don't suffer. I am working to make sure that people don't go hungry, and these comments I've received have been incredibly hurtful. It means that some people aren't taking the work of BLM seriously. Tamika Brown Nagin, Dean of the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard, says some of the disinformation surrounding BLM could be from the old-style anti-civil rights playbook of the 1960s. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover and segregationists, repeatedly used disinformation in an attempt to besmirch that movement. So opponents characterized activists as lawbreakers or as violent when overwhelming they really were nonviolent. Also, Martin Luther King Jr. and members of his inner circle were said to be communists or communist sympathizers. Although it is worth mentioning, MLK's actual politics, he was more of a democratic socialist. He even advocated for that kind of system near the end of his life. And it is worth noting that, the relationship between like actual communists and the civil rights movement is a little bit more complicated than that. I'd like to point out that this fear mongering is not new. There's an image that's going out there talking about like, anti-maskers say like, wearing a mask is communism. And you can find comparable images like race mixing is communism, misogynation is communism. And there were a lot of communists involved in the civil rights movement. This is very true. Of course, if you are like me, I am pro that. I am for that. Communism, again, this is another mystified term, means a moneyless, stateless, classless society. If you're fighting for that, you're on the right side of history. And you're usually going to be fighting for people who are on the side of social justice. Anyway, just as the civil rights movements of the past years, Black Lives Matter has seen its support both rise and decline after months of protest and the conviction of former police officer Derek Chauvin. While polls show a large majority of African Americans continue to back the movement, overall support has dropped from record levels seen after Floyd's death. How much of that loss is due to disinformation is difficult to measure, but what's certain is the battle over controlling what people believe about BLM and its influence is ongoing. And better luck everybody out there. I would also think like misinformation is a really big problem. Correct people when you can. Usually, again, personal relationships are the best way to do this. And I know we have a lot of those people in our lives in the right wing ecosystem and have a hard time even getting them to listen to us. But it's easier to talk to somebody in your family or maybe it was a friend growing up than trying to convince a stranger on the internet, because again, if you're trying to debate someone on the internet, they're not trying to learn anything most of the time. They're trying to debate and win a debate, and usually call you a libtard or whatever. Anyway, I think with that, let's go ahead. We're going to take a quick little break. Y'all are listening to the Hood Rat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Also want to point out we stream our full episodes on our Facebook page. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel where we break down our show into smaller, more digestible chunks. Keep your dial locked. This is the Hood Rat Strategist radio program, your only source for political revolution.